Hey everybody, today Rahdo runs through his top 10 masochistic games. And don't worry folks, that may sound a little clickbaity, but this is going to be a very family friendly episode where I'm just talking about 10 games that my wife Jen and I enjoy because they are particularly punishing to us as players. Now, any good board game, of course, is going to put a series of obstacles for you to overcome, a series of goals to achieve in spite of anything that might get in your way. But oftentimes we find games just say, hey, you know what? Chase after those sweet, sweet victory points, doing whatever it is you need to do, and we'll see how well everybody does. Those are fine, but we tend to gravitate towards and enjoy more games that push back, that really punish us, that put the screws to us in a big, big way so that we constantly feel this extra level of pressure and tension from the systems that seem like they are pretty much designed to ruin us. And, that's really interesting because both my wife and I always want to stay away from games where players can attack and punish each other. We have no desire to really try and ruin each other's plans. We're just very live and let live players. I'm just trying to do the best I can over here. You're doing the best you can over here. We'll just see who did the best overall. And that can lead, that kind of Care Bear friendly approach can lead to a game that doesn't have as much tension, as much drama, as much drive. And we really respond to that. So I guess it's really no surprise that we tend to gravitate toward games where, the other players aren't really the ones that are trying to hurt us and ruin us. It's the game itself. And while I could list dozens and dozens of games at varying levels of tension and stress that they create, these are the ones that jumped out to me as having the most meaningful implementation of that. So, with that out of the way, let's just start at number 10, Galaxy Trucker, which is a very, very cool design and maybe the most unique game that's on this list. And to be fair, it does put you under a lot of pressure, but maybe not as much as some of the ones that come later on. But what is Galaxy Trucker? Well, it is a real-time tile laying game where players were racing against the clock to grab a bunch of tiles, flip them over, and try to puzzle them all together, almost jigsaw puzzle-like, to make the best intergalactic space hauling ship they can. Because once the timer is up and everybody has built their space truck, you are then going to spend the second half of the game, traveling around the galaxy, picking stuff up and trying to bring it back. But you will be under constant, non-stop assault from space pirates and asteroids and all manner of really horrific things. And if you don't build a strong, resilient truck, a spaceship that can fight off waves of bad guys and has adequate shielding and all of that, the game will rip your ship apart. It is not at all uncommon in this game for one poorly placed asteroid to just hit your ship just in the right spot that literally breaks your ship in two. And they're like, there went half of my ship and all of my cargo, and now I'm just left with this little thing over here. Can I even limp back to the spaceport? It's awesome. We absolutely love it. And I have certainly seen plenty of people complain that, the game is just too harsh. It is unfair, and there's no fun to be had just watching the first half of the game, all that work you did to build a wonderful truck just to see it systematically destroyed. But, Jen and I we get a real kick out of it. It's kind of a masochistic thrill to see all our work undone. Again, it's not something we'd want to do to each other, but when the game does it to us, we find it very, very satisfying when we see what we're able to come through on the other side, when we can overcome those hurdles that the game throws our way. And the brilliant thing about Galaxy Trucker 2 is during the first half of the game, when you're in that real-time tile grabbing and laying stuff, you can spend as much time as you want studying a sizable portion of the disaster event cards that are going to come your way. And so you can build your ship knowing what it is you have to protect yourself from. Not perfect knowledge, but having a pretty good idea. But the problem is, the more time you spend on that, the less time you spend actually trying to puzzle things together so you can carry more stuff. It's a very interesting level of, and unique level of tension that the punishing elements of Galaxy Trucker brings, and that's why it's on the list at number 10. But now, let's move on to number 9, Milestones, which is a very, very cool rondel game where we are trying to recruit the best artisans and craftsmen to help us build and contribute to the prestige of the kingdom. And we do this by taking these tiles that represent different, masons and architects and stuff like that, and add them to a personal rondel. And every turn we'll build our rondel up a little bit, and then we will just basically move a marker along the rondel, activating all those people. And we're trying to put them so that, this person will activate first, so that they'll give the resources that the next person needs, and so on. And it's a really sharp game. It's a build your own rondel game. That in and of itself is very cool and unique. But here's the interesting thing. After you've done a full circuit of your rondel, when you get to the end, the king of the land that we're all contributing to takes notice of all these people you've hired and takes some of them. And you're like, ah! And you know that's coming. This you could build the perfect engine where all these people are just working in perfect synergy to help you achieve various milestones of the growth of your country. And hey, that's my wife Jen. Hold on everybody, I'll be right back. Okay, I have no idea where I was. My wife's, she's in the UK for a month, so we've been chatting every day on Skype. It was midnight her time, and so of course I wanted to say I love her and all of that. And right, I believe I was talking about number 9, Milestones. And it's just really, really cool that you make this, you're constantly building up this awesome rondel, and then every once in a while the king comes along and takes your best person. And you have to plan for that because you know it's going to set you back. But that creates a lot of really cool, fun tension, and just extra level of complexity that you have to bring into a situation that really elevates the experience. And I think is a great example of something that I can imagine some players just being very frustrated by that. Stop taking all my good people, stupid monarch. But for us, Milestones is a great number 9. Then on to number 8, the Gates of Loyang. Oh, this is a really excellent example because I think, it's a very, very common trope in modern designer Euro games to have contracts to fulfill. There's a set of cards that are on display, and what you need to do is collect the right resources via whatever the gameplay mechanisms are to complete those contracts to get victory points. You've seen that in a lot of games. The interesting thing about Loyang is you're running a vegetable stall at the Gates of Loyang in China, and medieval China, ancient China, I'm not quite sure what the time frame is. But anyway, the contracts don't just sit around waiting to be fulfilled by anybody. They are actual customer cards that we draft for in this very cool draft. And once you choose to take on one of these customers, you can see what it is they want, what type of vegetables you have to grow and sell them. But the thing is, you don't fulfill their needs just once. They become repeat customers, and they keep coming back round after round after round. And you have to keep being able to deliver what it is they want, because if you don't, they become unhappy customers. And that can be a real problem. But the game is at its best when you are actually trying to juggle several different customers at once, and you can see what they are, and you're just under so much tension because you're trying to grow stuff as fast as you can, or trade to get the stuff you need to be able to fulfill your customers' needs. But all this tension, the game on some level is not responsible for this at all. You took these customers on yourself. You said, yeah, you know what? I think that person who wants, pumpkins and I forget what the vegetables are, rutabagas for like the next 5 rounds, I think I can do that. I think I can come up with a plan to make that happen. And then you have put this huge burden on yourself because Loyang is a game of very narrow margins, and it's a fun, challenging game of tons and tons of good resources, and you will be punished accordingly if you upset your repeat customers. And like I said, it's where a lot of the tension and excitement comes from, being able to fulfill these orders. But again, that's what makes it special. It's not just some monolithic external game design entity that created it. You brought it upon yourself. You have no one to blame but yourself. If you suddenly find yourself just saying, having to flip that little happy customer to sad customer, that's really going to hurt you down the road. And it's awesome. I mean, the game is really great, but this central mechanism, which I haven't really seen too terribly often. Like I said, normally it's just that, oh yeah, there's lots of contracts out there and just first come, first serve. But here, it's much more personal and relatable. The pressure that you are under in my number 8, Gates of Loyang. Then number 7 is Notre Dame. And this is a very interesting one because it is set in, I'm not sure, is it Renaissance era France or maybe it's still medieval era? But it's during the building of the Notre Dame Cathedral. And we are rich Parisians who are trying to contribute to the economic and growth of the city and, the welfare of people, and also trying to, increase our own status and all of that, as you so often do in these games. But the interesting thing is, every round there are a series of people cards that we can recruit that are put out in play, and at the end of the round we have an opportunity to recruit these. At the beginning of the round, I think it's 3 cards are put out, and at the end of the round, after we've done all of our card drafting and our economic machinations, we could recruit these people. But at the beginning of the round, when these cards come out, these cards have little rat symbols on them. 1, 2, or 3, maybe? And 0? I forget exactly how many. I haven't played for a while. But the interesting thing is, depending on what 3 cards come out at the end of the round, those rats represent the increase in the threat of plague that affects all players. Everybody has their own little plague meter. And so over the course of the game, it is very unpredictable. Well, on one level, it's unpredictable because you don't know exactly how hard the plague is going to push. It depends on the order the cards come out. But by the same token, there is an inevitability to it. I mean, before the game is over, plague will strike, and it is particularly problematic. Not only if your plague meter climbs all the way to the top, not only because you lose a few points, that's kind of a problem, but more importantly, some of the investments you have made, your long-term investments in the different elements of the game, get ripped away. And that is super painful. But it's a near constant onslaught. Every round, more and more plague builds up. And so there are lots of mechanisms you can use to try to stave off the creeping influence of the plague, but it's always pushing on every player equally, and how well you can manage that without that slowing down your forward progress is a big part of what success looks like in Notre Dame. But it's just omnipresent. It's a bit unpredictable because it might start out slow and build up later. It might be heavy right from the get-go and then lay off after a while because of the variance of how those cards come out. But it is an omnipresent threat and a huge amount of pressure that you're under, which is why it makes my number 7 Notre Dame. Then we go on to number 6, Agricola. And Agricola is really going to stand in for lots and lots and lots of euros that borrow. I don't know if Agricola came up with the idea of feeding your workers, a worker placement game where you have to fulfill the needs of your labor force, but surely it's the one that popularized the idea, and now you see it in tons and tons and tons of games. There are so many games I could have put into this slot, and Agricola stands in for all of them. Your Zolk and the Mayan calendars and your Stone Ages and all that. But I think Agricola is a particularly worthy one to list here because it's probably a bit more punishing. Usually, the punishment involved for not feeding your people it's kind of like a slap on the wrist. Heck, in some games, you could actually even build a strategy out of, I'm going to take that slap on the wrist because me not having to meet the needs of my people clears up my resources so I can do other stuff, so I'll stay ahead of whatever the penalty is. You cannot get away with that in Agricola. If you do not keep your people fed, it will bite you hard. It's 3 points I think you lose for every family member. By the end of the game, you might have 5, or hopefully you have 5 family members. That's 15 points lost if you don't feed them. So you are under a constant level of pressure. And now, I'm not saying it's an untenable amount of pressure because it's certainly achievable. And it kind of defines a baseline of what you have to do. You have to keep your people fed because the stakes are too high. And that, of course, replicates the reality of a hard medieval farmer's life of, it is a harsh penalty if we starve. And we have to beg. That's what happens if you can't feed your people, they have to take begging cards. So that means they do get fed, but you end up losing a lot of points, which is your social standing in the community. And it's really great. I love feeding mechanism. I think it's just so pure and elegant a system as kind of a gating mechanism, because often in worker placement games, and certainly Agricola is a prime candidate for this, one of the main things you pursue over the course of the game is building up a bigger and stronger workforce. The more workers I have, the more I can do, the bigger my decision space and all of that. And the pushback that the game gives you is, yeah, that's really great. You can do a lot more stuff with 5 workers than you can with 2. It's amazing when you start out with 2, and by the end of the game you got 4 or 5. It's such a huge family, you're pulling off so much stuff. But the bigger your workforce, the bigger your operating costs, the overhead, the amount of food you have to generate for these people. And so that creates a very interesting level of tension that, again, is responsive to your success. And if another player can make a strategy out of keeping their workforce smaller, which certain occupations in Agricola would let you do, then they don't have to worry so much about food. But, do you try to work your food generation into dovetailing into whatever other type of mechanisms, engine you're trying to build? Is it kept separate? It adds a lot of depth to the game, but it is the fundamental tension that drives everything. If Agricola didn't have that push to ensure that you kept kept your people alive, kept your people happy and well fed, it would not. It would not make both gens in my top 10 games of all time. It's absolutely essential to the experience, and it's why we love it. It's really Agricola that made me realize just how strongly Jen and I respond to games that will punish us if we don't fulfill some particular requirements that the game sets out for you. It's Agricola that made us realize we're kind of gaming masochists, and it's why it's my number 6. But then let's move on to number 5, Walnut Grove. And Walnut Grove, I could just say, hey, you know what? It's another Feed Your People one, just like Agricola. But there are a few things that make it different, that make it stand out, that it ratchet up that tension even more. Again, this is a game where you get a bigger and bigger workforce, so you can harvest more stuff, so you can do more stuff. And at the end of every round, winter comes, because the game is basically patterned after the 4 seasons. Every year is a round, and you go through your round doing the harvest phase, and then you go to town to convert your goods and other goods and try to build up your infrastructure for your American homesteader farm that is full of all the workers you hire and all of that. But at the end of the year, when winter comes, you have to feed your workers. But the interesting thing is, unlike Agricola, and unlike most feed your worker games where, hey, you know what, you always have to make sure you set aside enough money or enough food or enough whatever it is. In Walnut Grove, every one of your workers potentially has different feeding requirements. So it is a much more complex puzzle to make sure you have crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's to make sure you do not suffer the penalty for not having fed your workforce and kept them, well, not only fed, but warm. You have to keep them warm in winter as well. So it's very thematic. And I really think that ratchets it up even more and makes it a much more omnipresent issue that you're constantly having to deal with. And it's why I rank it up even higher than Agricola in terms of really meaningful impact to the game. My number 5, Walnut Grove. Then we move on to number 4. Peloponnes. Another game, by the way, that is in my top 10 games of all time. Not surprising, the games that really put this kind of pressure on you end up making it into my favorite games of all time because we just love it so much. In Peloponnes, you are building an era of antiquity civilization. And you play through a number of rounds by auctioning to get breakthroughs in technology or new land that you can tame to be able to harvest more resources and all of that. And every round, there's this big pile of disaster chits. Most of them are blank, but some of them have little symbols on them. And every round you flip over a few, and you're like, oh, okay, no disaster, no disaster. Oh no, drought. Once you have flipped over 3, I think, 3 of the drought, or 3 of the storm, or 3 of the plague, that particular disaster will strike everybody. And these disasters can be devastating. And the beautiful thing is, you don't know exactly when a disaster is going to hit because there's this random variance to it. But you can see it's starting to build up. You can see, the skies are getting stormy and we better start preparing for flooding season. And that means, that means either you're going to lose a lot of the resource. If you are not prepared for that flood, you're going to lose a lot of the stuff you've built up. So you have to start setting things aside. You have to literally save for a rainy day because you can see that rainy day coming. But there's this extra level of tension because you can't be sure when that flood happens. That flood might sit at 2 of the 3 flooding tiles revealed for the whole game. You're like, when is this flood gonna come? I'm ready for it, and I'm earmarking all of these resources that I need for it, and I could be using those resources elsewhere. Thank you very much. Come on, flood. And then you're like, okay, fine. In the meantime, 2 other disasters have happened. Okay, I'll go on ahead and spend a little bit of this stuff I've said, and then boom, that's when the flood happens. It's awesome. It's so cool. It's such a simple little mechanism. This kind of creeping disaster. It's not like I guess actually it's kind of like Notre Dame. I talked about this in Notre Dame as well. I hadn't thought about the overlap there, that you can't be 100% certain when the thing is going to happen. But in Peloponnes, there are several. I think it's like 5 different disasters, each one of which has different impacts on you. Making you lose food versus population, making you lose resources versus the technological breakthroughs you've built up, stuff like that. And they're all accruing. They're all going to hit at some point or other. And it's just a matter of protecting yourself, either by getting certain tiles that aren't available to everybody. And if you bid high, you could get that tile that protects you from flood, and then you don't have to worry about it at all. But if you weren't able to get that, and because you can see the floods coming up, suddenly when that tile becomes available, everybody wants it so bad, unless you decide, no, I can prepare another way. It's these disasters always looming on the horizon that make Peloponnes such a compulsive and compelling game. Again, without it, it would just become kind of a Monty Hall, just build as fast as you can and try to snowball things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But having the system push back is what elevates this game above its brethren. Going back to number 6, Agricola, it's what elevates Agricola in large part above Caverna, where Caverna, which is the sequel to Agricola and has a lot of the same systems, and you still have to feed your people in Caverna, but the pressure is just nowhere near as omnipresent. It is so much easier to gather the resources you need because there's wild card stuff and all sorts of things. And and it's one of the reasons Jen and I don't enjoy Caverna as much as Agricola. I meant to say this earlier, totally forgot though. But it's one of the things that really makes Peloponnes so special. And in my top 10 of all time, it's that omnipresent threat, the fact that this game will try to crush you multiple times in multiple different ways, and preparing for those and overcoming those problems while still thriving. I guess that's what it comes down to. A lot of games that don't have this kind of this pressure, this game design pressure, they just become all about how well can you thrive. I guess we like a game that forces us to survive. And if we can survive, then how well do we thrive? And that's a much more interesting thing. And again, a lot of games would get this from players actively attacking each other and stealing from each other. But we don't like that. We don't want to do that, like I said up front. So a game where the systems do it is awesome, and Peloponnes is awesome. It's why it's my number 4. But let's keep going to number 3, Myrmes. And this is I feel kind of bad. This is the 3rd game on the list that's just all about feeding your workers. And that's definitely the case here because you are a queen ant managing your colony of ants. Sending them out to scrounge for food on the surface and growing the next generation of larvae and doing lots of worker placement-y business. And much like Walnut Grove, at the end of every year, because you play through several years, there's a winter where you have to make sure everybody's fed and you've set stuff aside. But remember how I was talking about one of the beautiful things about Feed Your Workers is it's such a great gating mechanism that the more powerful you get, the more your responsibilities are. Myrmes flips it on its head because you have a set number of workers. I think they're called nurses, if I recall correctly. Your nursing ants. They do the lion's share of the work, which is your worker placement to decide what everybody's going to do. Then you got soldier ants that go do things, area control stuff and all that. And so you have to make sure the nurses are taken care of at the end of the year. Here's the thing, though. You want to get more nurses so that you can do more actions, but that means you need more food. Fine. That follows the trend that I talked about in Agricola. But there's this cool thing where, as part of setup, there are, 6, I think, different objective tiles laid out. And everybody can see right from the get-go, hey, you could try to be building towards claiming objective tile X that will give you points at the end of the game for having achieved in some particular metric. This is not at all uncommon in games, where, hey, there's a random set of objectives, everybody's trying to compete for them and all that. Here's the thing about Myrmes. I've done really, really well at the food storage objective or whatever it might be, or the land grab objective. and I want to claim it. For me to claim these objectives, I have to give up my nurses, the workers that I use to drive everything. And so, it is not at all uncommon in Myrmes, as the game goes on, that you need, when the winters come, you need to keep generating that food to not suffer the penalties. And, and that just becomes a bigger, more omnipresent threat over the course of the game. But at the same time that threat becomes greater, your ability to meet that threat becomes weaker, because to score the big objective cards, you have to give your workers up. And that's brilliant, because then there's that tension of, okay, well, you know what? Nobody else seems to be interested in grabbing that. If I can just hold on to this nurse for one more round so I can get a little bit more before I sacrifice her to claim that objective card, that adds such a cool new wrinkle on what would otherwise be just another game where you have to feed your workers. I absolutely love it. It's why it pushes all the way up here to my number 3, Myrmes. Then we move on to number 2. Shadowrun Crossfire. And now here's the thing. Shadowrun is the only game I'm going to put on this list that is a co-op. And I could have made this 10 co-ops, because that's the nature of what a cooperative board game is. There is no threat from other players, so we create game-driven threats, whether it's the spread of disease in Pandemic, or whether it's various fantasy monsters in Gloomhaven, or whatever co-op it is, there is some design-driven threat that players have to push off that will punish you if you can't deal with it. So on some level, all co-op games are masochistic, and because of that, it just seems like it's woven in. It's not like it's a choice that the developers have to say, well, should we have that pressure come from other players, or should we have it come from the system? So I left them out. Different co-ops put you under more or less pressure, and that's a big part of how strong a game simulation they might be. That's all fine. Shadowrun Crossfire is the only one I decided to put on because it goes well above and beyond the normal level of harshness and punishment that a co-op game metes out. It is one of the most challenging and brutal co-ops ever developed, and it is my favorite one of it's my second favorite. It is one of my favorite ones of all time, and it is in large part because of that. And the extra thing that makes Shadowrun so special is, while my wife, who I spoke with earlier, as you watched, she responds to crushing, punishing gameplay systems in a competitive game, but she always kind of balks at them in cooperative games. I'm thinking like Ghost, not Ghost Hunter, Ghost Warrior, Ghost Fighter. Oh man, that's driving me nuts. You know what I'm talking about. It's got Ghost in the title. You're taking off Ghosts. It's from Yellow? No? I don't know. Anyway, there are a lot of co-op games that put you under immense amount of pressure, and Jen often finds she doesn't care for them. In the same way, if it were a competitive game, she's okay with it. When it's a cooperative game, she doesn't particularly like it. Generally, co-op games have to have this kind of roller coaster ride where you're under a lot of pressure, but then you're under no pressure. And then you're under a lot of pressure and under no pressure. Pandemic is the perfect example of this. Shadowrun doesn't really do that. Shadowrun puts you under an immense amount of pressure right from the get-go and just keeps ratcheting the tension up. And it's a testament to how brilliant it is that Jen likes it in spite of that. And so I wanted to give it props above all other co-ops out there that we've tried, that even though it is at once one of the most harshest and unforgiving, it's also one that Jen really, really enjoys. And that is because as fast as the pressure, the external pressure from all the cyberpunk enemies that are trying to take us out in the Shadowrun universe, as they just grow in power and outnumber us, and it just seems impossible we could ever win, we kind of grow in power even faster. But it's all kind of hidden within the deck building structure of the game. And so while we don't feel like, just because, hey, we bought a couple extra cards and we put them in our deck, we don't really feel like we're getting that much more powerful. And yet it feels like what we're up against is just exponentially increasing in strength, and we have no chance. And yet the brilliance of the design is it's almost hidden and invisible, if you're playing well, just how fast we are growing in power as well. We're becoming even more powerful than the enemies, faster than the enemies. And yet somehow it feels like a David and Goliath situation where we have no chance. It's absolutely brilliant. And, I know I'm saying all this. There's going to be a lot of people who see this top 10 and say I'm crazy. They played Shadowrun Crossfire, and it is completely, brutally unfair. Success comes down 100% to just pure luck of the draw. And folks, I've said it before, I'll say it again, that is not the case. Shadowrun Crossfire requires a lot of practice to get good at, because it is a cooperative game that forces you as players with the threats and the stress and the punishment it puts you through. As a masochistic player, if you enjoy this game, it forces you to deal with these threats in completely non-intuitive, almost antithetical ways. Compared to other co-ops out there. And it really requires you to rethink. I mean, I just recently did a little strategy primer on a YouTube channel. I'll put a link for it up there if you want to go. I just talked about a couple of examples of why Shadowrun Crossfire forces you to fundamentally rethink the basics of how to do a co-op strategy if you want to win. That's why we like it so much. It puts us under so much stress, so much threat, more so than any other co-op out there. There are very few. Oh, which is the ghost game? This is driving me nuts. Ghost Stories! Is that right? I think that's what it is. I'm going to look it up. Ghostst. Yes, Ghost Stories. The poster child for really harsh, cruel, unforgiving co-op. Ghost Stories is a walk in the park compared to Shadowrun Crossfire, until you master it. And once you learn the rhythms of Shadowrun, and we've gotten to the point where we win about 50% of the time now. At the beginning of the game, we would win like 1 out of every 10 games we play. The developers, meanwhile, the people who made the game and know all the ins and outs, they win 90% of the time. So they have to introduce artificial difficulty increasing things. So for you folks out there who think it's literally impossible to win without luck, remember, you can win 90% of the time if you know and follow the strategies that the developers do. I gave a little bit of hints about that in a recent video I did. And in fact, I did a whole strategy guide tutorial in conjunction with the developers. Maybe I should put a link to that one instead. But anyway, long story short, it's my, what was it? I've lost it. It's my number 2 game for board game masochists like me and Jen, Shadowrun. But the number 1, folks, you gotta give the crown, and I don't think this will come as a surprise to many people, the crown must go to In the Year of the Dragon from design superstar Stefan Feld. This game is amazingly brutal. It takes place over 1 year, the Year of the Dragon. There are 12 rounds for each of the months. And right laid out on the board, right from the get-go, 12 months, 12 rounds, 12 disasters to overcome. Forget about Peloponnes with its 5 disasters. Forget about Agricola with its half dozen times you have to feed your people. 12 rounds. At the end of every round, some absolutely world-shattering problem is going to hit you. And actually, that's not true. You get a couple of months. The first couple of months, you get a little bit of time to get your feet, and then the disasters just start beating you down mercilessly, and you must prepare for them, because this game will show you no mercy. And if you miscalculate, if you misplan trying to gather your resources while building up the glory of the emperor and, making palaces and recruiting personages and all that kind of Euro-y stuff you would do, if you misplan, this game will destroy you in the most demoralizing way. And that can make it incredibly frustrating and demoralizing. But if you pull it off, if you can survive the Year of the Dragon, and, you're not going to be able to excel at every one of the disasters that are coming, every plague and famine, and heck, even good things like festivals. They're disasters if you don't get your fireworks ready, stuff like that. You can't succeed at all of them, but you can set yourself up to excel at some of them and get by on others. And it is a delicate balancing act. And like I said, you got to go in knowing that this game is just going to rip you apart if you don't bring your A game. And while I have to admit, I think when I did my top 10 Stefan Feld games, In the Year of the Dragon didn't make my top 10, even though I think it's a brilliant design, and for a lot of people it'd be like the number 1 or number 2 Feld of all time. It didn't because it's almost too soul-crushing. Jen generally does pretty well, but sometimes I've had a few, I don't think I ever want to play this game again, because you get halfway through and there's no coming back. You made one bad hire. You made one miscalculation on the value of a thing, and you know it's just all going to be downhill from here, and you just can't even stomach the idea of going forth. Remember, I was trying to rank these, not in terms of what our favorites were, but just in terms of how much pressure they put you under. And in the Year of the Dragon, almost put you under too much, but again, I have had games where I made it through on the other side unscathed, and I feel like I weathered the Year of the Dragon, and that is just the best feeling, which is why, one of the reasons, it's the number one in the Year of the Dragon. And there you go, folks. 10 games for people who like a little bit of punishment in their gameplay. And thanks for watching. I hope you have a very, very nice day. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.